Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.
There's a storm across the valley, the clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Today is October 31st, 2024, that famous day every year where we celebrate children and departed ones on Halloween. And so I welcome today for part 4 of the extraordinary life and times of Avery Lee Williams. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Kevin Williams, Avery's son.
Yes.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. You know, when we last let off in the last show, we talked about young Avery Lee Williams, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and he was working his way through college in the kitchens. He would always tell he was an excellent cook through his entire life, and he learned it all in the restaurants. And so he was working at many restaurants. We talked about the Howard Johnsons in Easton, and then he went over to the Sylvia Sweets Tea Room in Brockton on Main Street, and he worked there with a lot of Greek, it was owned by a Greek family, and so that's where he also learned how to speak Greek, and he was very fluent in Greek. Paid off later on for him. But after the restaurant would close, 9 or 10 o'clock, he'd close up on Main Street, and it'd be a Friday night or Saturday night, and he and his friend would go to the Greek coffee house, or the cafeteria. And it was kind of it was a gambling hall. And Lee ultimately worked his way into dealing baboot. Now, baboot was the Greek word for baccarat, or chemin de fer, which is also baccarat in French, from what I've been told. So Lee was a baccarat dealer at 18, 19, or 20, 21 years old after he'd get out of the restaurant, which of course migrated to blackjack, and then it migrated over to the craps table. So there was a young Lee Williams, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, as a stick man at the floating crap game. Now, I don't know where it was run. He told me in Brockton. I don't recall the location. Someone older than I may remember it. But this would be 1953 to 1958 in the city of Brockton. Now, the floating crap game and the casino was run by a fellow by the name of Brockton Eddie Massaud. He was a Lebanese fellow. And Brockton Eddie, this is a fact because it was also confirmed in the book Unbeaten, which is the story of Rocky Marciano, came out in 2018-19. It was an excellent story, researched. And I remember reading it, and there was a paragraph there where Rocky Marciano was driving down Main Street and saw Brockton Eddie Massaud, the bookie, and he jumped out of his car, chased him up to the second floor on I think it was Main Street, and dangled him outside the window upside down, saying, "You son of a gun, you're going to pay me my money." And he was labeled as Brockton Eddie Massaud. So this floating crap game was run in the city of Brockton, but can you just imagine the amount of gambling activity, illicit gambling activity, during the Rocky Marciano fight years? Everyone in the city of Brockton loved Rocky Marciano. He was the favorite son, and the amount of action that must have come through the city of Brockton on those fights was epic. And so that action had to be passed off, as you may know, because if too much wagering is going on one side of the fight, what about the folks down in Philadelphia that want the other fighter, right? It has to be offset so that the gambling houses, the bookies, whoever they may be, can make the spread, right? And in the spread is where they make all their money. So you have to even off those bets. So there's Lee, and he's working for a bookie in the evening. And he would tell me, boy, it was so much fun. And I would be the stick man at the game, and folks would place their bets and, what's going to come out as a number. And if you're familiar with shooting craps, you'll know that the odds change based on what kind of number is going to come out. Everyone wants a 7, but if you roll a 4, you have to make that number a 5, a 6, a 10, and it pays different odds. But there was Lee. He had a mind for math, and he could quickly calculate if someone put down however many dollars, if it paid off 3 to 2. 2 to 1 is very easy to calculate. I think there may be 6 to 5. I'm not sure, but there's different odds that need to be paid. And you have to do it quickly in your head, and you have to do it correctly. And you pay off the table when someone craps out, and then a new shooter comes in. So there was Lee at a young age, and if there are parents out there, can you just imagine your 18, 19, or 20-year-old son or daughter running the crap game and paying out the odds and staying out till 2 or 3 in the morning? There wasn't a lot of control, especially in the summertime, down from 5 corners from his folks on that kind of thing. So he was able to do that. He told me on his deathbed when he was very sick up at Good Sam, and he said to me, he looked to me and he says, I never told you anything, Kev, but I may have been a bagman for the Patriarca family. And I said, the Patriarca family? Where is this coming from, Dad? What are you talking about? And he said, well, at late night after the casino would get out, I was really fired up, 2 o'clock in the morning. And sometimes Brockton Eddie would say, hey, Lee, I need you to bring this bag down to Providence. And I don't want you to look in it. And you're going to meet a guy named Nick on such and such a street in such and such a parking lot. You just hand him the bag and you turn around and come right back. But there's a $100 bill in it for you. Now, $100 back in 1954, 55, 56, cash was a lot of money. And so that piqued Lee's interest. So he would do the run on occasion. And he felt bad about it in his later years because he was a member of the community and that's what he wanted that. But it was very interesting. And I said, so Dad, the Patriarca family. Now, it's also interesting to know that the Brockton rackets, you would call it, the illicit gambling, was not tied into Whitey Bulger. It was not tied into the Angiulo family, which was Boston, but it was tied into Providence.
Really?
And I find that interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten confirmation from that from anyone else. It would be interesting if someone could confirm that, but that's what Lee said. He made the run to Providence. But then again, with Easton and Mansfield, you're not too far away from the Rhode Island border, so it wouldn't be that surprising to think that it was tied into the Providence rackets. So I said to Dad, as he felt bad about it, I said, now, Dad, don't worry about that. That was so long ago. Nobody's going to care. And that's why I feel comfortable mentioning it. And I said, how many times did it happen? Well, more than 3 and less than 6 times he would make that run. I said, let's let bygones be bygones. Everyone around it has probably passed away, and no one will remember that. So there was Lee Williams that was making some really good money after hours, working in the kitchens, hustling, and he was very surprised and thankful that Bridgewater State would let him graduate. He said, I would be coming in bleary-eyed at 3, I'd sleep from 3 in the morning till 6 in the morning, and then I'd get up and get to the commuter room at 7 in the morning or 8 in the morning and start a little poker game myself in the commuter room.
No.
And he would rake the pot. He would get everyone some snacks if they needed it. Come on, fellas, let's put in, because young, as I mentioned previously, young men like to gamble and test their battle of wits and their luck. And then, of course, classes started at 8 or 9 or whatever it was, and off they'd go. But he would rake the pot in the commuter room at Bridgewater State. And to his last day, he was very, very thankful and very fond of Bridgewater State College, Teachers College, which is now a university, for allowing him to graduate with not the best marks, but he was lucky to just make it through, especially his junior and senior year. So at that point, he was doing student teaching over in Mansfield, and he was going to be an English teacher. Loved English and literature. And of course, that's where he got his poetry from, his love of poetry. And so, but it wasn't his passion. It didn't resonate. The kids were tough. They wouldn't pay attention. And so after he got his degree, he worked the summer and did the same old things that he always did. But then as the fall came in, he said, I got to get an occupation here. I've got to move on. So he mentioned that there was a bit of a recession. He called it the Eisenhower recession. You may recall that it was before my time. And so work wasn't easy to come by. But he did have a favorite uncle, Francis Adams, who was an Easton fellow, big Adams family in Easton, a previous generation. And they lived down on Main Street here, I believe. And he lived in New York City. And he had a parking lot in New York City. And so he said, hey, Lee, why don't you come on down to New York City? I'll see if I can get you a job. I can help you out. New York City for a fellow from Five Corners. How you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen New York City? Well, Lee went down there and he stayed with his uncle for a month or so. And he looked at a brochure about the New York Institute for Finance. And his uncle talked to him a little bit about the stock market. Gee, Uncle, it sounds a little bit like gambling. Well, it is a little bit like gambling. However, there's a big difference between the stock market and cards or a horse race. With the stock market, you put your money into that company and you hope for the best, and you can kind of analyze it like you can a horse or a game or whatever it's going to be. But you decide when the race is over. The race doesn't end when the cards are all on the table or when the horse crosses the finish line. Then you throw your tickets in the air and you're all done. But when you have a stock, it's for the long term. So you can invest in that stock and you have a much longer time frame to let things play out. So my uncle, because he had that parking lot, had a lot of connections on Wall Street, because the Wall Street traders would sometimes like to use his lot. And he was friendly, very friendly. Oh, Francie, can you help? I'm late for work. Do you have one spot for me? I do. Hey, listen, Joe, can you help me out? I got a nephew that needs a job. Well, anyways, he got him an interview. Lee passed the interview, and it was for working as a clerk on the seat of the New York Stock Exchange. Okay, one of the seats of the New York Stock Exchange. Now, this seat turned out to be owned by the de Cordova family, which was a very wealthy family in New York City. I believe it was a Jewish family, but during the Inquisition, they tried to made their name more Spanish to avoid the Inquisition. So there was the de Cordova family, and they had a seat on the exchange. And when you were a clerk on the exchange, you worked as a specialist, and you worked on a special group of stocks. And the stocks that they ran the books for, the trading for, were Lorillard Tobacco, Checker Motors, which was the Checker cabs, U.S. Steel.
Wow.
U.S. Steel was one of the biggest stocks in the New York Stock Exchange in 1959. 59, 60, 61, he was down there in New York City. Lehigh Industries, and a couple of others that were pretty good.
So what were his duties?
His duties, now everything is computerized. But back then, when an order came in, someone wanted to buy 500 shares of U.S. Steel, the specialist would match up the buyer and the seller. I've got a seller over here that wants to sell their stock for 36 1/8 because stocks traded in eighths and quarters back then, which was a throwback to the Spanish days. The doubloons were all in eighth pieces of 8, right?
Right.
And so, kind of strange trivia. And now it's all decimalized. It went to 10 cents. Now it's a penny of a spread. But there was a spread of 12 1/2 cents on a lot of stocks. So if someone came in and wanted to sell their U.S. Steel, Lee would match it up with a buyer. I've got a buyer over here that's willing to pay XYZ. Will you take that? And they were on the phone a lot. And everything was written down into a book by hand at that time.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So there was Lee logging in all of these transactions for all of these books, but the stock exchange wasn't open the hours weren't huge, 10 to 2.
No.
10 to 2 back then.
Yeah.
But things moved slowly. And of course, when anyone had a big day and someone broke 1 million shares were traded, which is nothing now.
No.
They'd have a huge, they'd shoot all, the paper into the air and, have a ticker tape.
Big celebration.
Yes. So, so that was what Lee was doing in New York City. He was making some pretty good money, but unfortunately his dad passed away while he was down there. And of course he had Brother Bud and Sister Claire and Sister Dottie that were much younger back, and there was his mom down at Five Corners, and they lost the breadwinner of the family, and tough situation. And Lee was kind of starting to miss Easton, and so he told his boss, who was the principal of the seat and of the exchange seat, that, Mr. Howard, my dad passed, and I miss home, and I miss my mom and my siblings, and so I'm gonna move on back to Easton.
And because he felt an obligation to support
Yes,
the family.
Yes, he did, and he always paid board, but now his mom really needed help. And so here's a little vignette from that conversation. He told me later in life, he said, I had that conversation with Mr. Howard, who I really liked quite a bit. And Mr. Howard said, "Oh, Lee, what are you doing? You're going to leave me with these DeCordova kids." The DeCordova kids were nice kids, but this was like a make-work job for them, that the family had the seat on the exchange, and you got to go down there and work. And he said, "Lee, these kids, they're not going to be able to carry it when you leave. You can't leave me like this. Please reconsider, and I'll raise your pay." "No, Mr. Howard, I can't do it. I got a situation back home, and I kind of miss the hometown, and I'm not really a city person. This has been a fun chapter, but I really got to go." So he asked him a couple of times, "Please reconsider," but Lee was adamant, and so at the end of the conversation, he said, "I understand, Lee. How can I help you?" And Lee said, "Well, I really enjoy this business. I love the stock market, and it's very intriguing and interesting. So if you could get me a job back in my area, working in this business, I would really appreciate it." And Mr. Howard said, "Hang on just a minute." He opened up the phone book, and he said he started looking at because you had to use the phone book. There was no internet search, right? Who's got an office near Easton? He said, "Lee, would you like to work in Brockton or Taunton?" "Well, Taunton's the next town, but I'm very familiar with Brockton because of his gambling days. Very familiar with Brockton. We shop there. My mom, we do. So how about Brockton?" "Well, I have got a company here that Hemp Hill Noise has an office in Brockton on School Street. You know where School Street is?" "Oh, sure I do. Right off of Main. How would you like to work there?" "Oh, that'd be great." So he calls up the principal, the head of Hemp Hill Noise and Company. "This is Mr. Howard from the DeCordova desk, the seat of the exchange." Yes. We could use a favor down here. I've got a guy. He's going to be a good employee for you, but I need you to get him a job in your Brockton office. Well, Lee couldn't hear the other side of the story, but very shortly afterwards, Mr. Howard hung up the phone and said, Lee, you start on Monday. So what happened was, of course, when the floor of the exchange calls any brokerage house and talks to the president and says, I need a favor, that favor is handled very quickly, because if there's ever an error, and now they've got a favor of the exchange in their pocket. So if E.F. Hutton or Smith Barney or Shearson Lehman or whatever firm it was, even to this day I'm sure it holds, needs a favor from someone trading on the floor, that's a big chit to have in your pocket.
Right.
And so Mr. Howard lined that job up for Lee Williams to work at 21 School Street in Brockton, in the basement, at the Hempel Noise Company. And there Lee started in 1960, I believe. And he was the young kid, and they were all older brokers there. And he was the young guy.
He was 25.
He made, yes, there you go, 25.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, he was 25. He spent a couple of years down there because he got married at 29.
And
He had me at 29.
The reason I know that is because Avery was 7 years older than I.
Yes, you're right on. He was 25. So he was the young kid in the office, and there were all the old brokers there. But of course, the old brokers were set in their ways, and they didn't want to hustle, but there was Lee hustling and trying to get customers, and can I buy some stock for you? Because that was the only place you could buy stock. You had to go into an office, open up an account.
Really?
You couldn't get your prices anywhere other than the Wall Street Journal and the Sunday paper would have the prices, if you recall. Even up until the 80s, that's how it was. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was very limited availability on the prices, just the computer that you had, but they barely had computers back then. They had a ticker tape, and you got your prices off of a ticker tape. IBM, U.S. Steel is trading it. And so that's how it was done. So there's Avery Lee, and he's now working in the city of Brockton. And he's trying to start his business, and he loves it. He loves it. It's 10 to 2. It leaves him a lot of time to do other stuff. That's when he got involved in the JCs. He met a bunch of guys that were doing community projects, and he really enjoyed that camaraderie and that volunteerism, and we can do anything. Come on, we can do it. And the rah, Robert's Rules, all that stuff, which we'll probably do a show on just the Easton JCs,
right?
Because it was quite a force in the 60s and 70s.
Can I interrupt one thing? You mentioned how when he, in his gambling days in Brockton, he had to he was good at math, and he had to make calculations, and that served him well on the stock exchange.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that's right. Because when he was running the specialist book, and you would be buying and selling, you would say, okay, you had to keep all in order. Who bought what and who was owed the money, right? So these were the last days of analog, pen and paper. Okay, now this is a great segue, Priscilla, to Lee got a call in 1961 or 62 from Mr. Howard. Lee, Mr. Howard here from the Cordova desk, and listen, I need help. We're transferring all of our systems over into the computer age, and everything's screwed up. The statements aren't going out right. The bandwidth was not matching up with the amount of volume that was coming in, and they couldn't process well. And these Cordova kids, God bless them, but they're not up to speed. Will you come back and reconsider? I'm going to fly you down to New York City. I'm going to put you up in the Waldorf Astoria, and we're going to have dinner there, and I want to talk to you. And Lee went. Because he owed Mr. Howard, and he liked Mr. Howard. And so he was at 26, 27, 28 years old at the Waldorf Astoria, having steak dinner with one of the principals of the New York Stock Exchange. And Mr. Howard said, Lee, if you come back, I'll pay you $100,000 a year. Now, a teacher was making about 12, to put it into context. And Lee, I will make you a partner at the firm. Now, as a partner, as you know, with a law firm, it's very common on Wall Street, you get a percentage of the profits at the end of the year. And of course, you get the Wall Street bonus. It's not about your salary. It's not about your pay. It's about the bonuses at the end of the year. And to this day, Wall Street is well renowned for the amount of bonuses they pass out in a good year. And it was a tremendous amount of money. And he passed. He said, Mr. Howard, I'm really enjoying myself. I'm in the JCs. I've got this book of business I'm cultivating. I really am loving what I'm doing up in Massachusetts. And I really appreciate this offer, but I have to pass. And he always wondered, on his deathbed, he said to me, you know, Kev, sometimes I wonder if I stayed in New York City, I would have had a fortune, a large fortune, but I don't think I would have had as much fun. And I said, you did the right thing.
But you were talking about how he had to, back in the days when he was 18, 19, 20, 21, and he had to make these mathematical calculations on the spot.
Yes.
And how did that transfer over? Because he had to figure out how much somebody was owed on a bet.
On a purchase and a sale.
Yeah.
And he had to match them up. So it was very fast action. Remember, he had some ADD, as he would say himself. And so that fast action, he loved it. And that's why he loved the JCs. When they would have those meetings, they would be pretty wild from what I heard. Half the room would agree, half the room would disagree. Then you had to debate and get the other side to, and sometimes you only had 60% support for a project that you were going to go with, and the other half, they booed you. But he loved that kind of action.
Yeah. Now we have 3 minutes left.
Yes.
So let's, there are some other highlights that you want to mention.
Well, there was his time on the New York Stock Exchange, and then, of course, his time in Brockton as a financial advisor. Now, in the old days, that was called a stockbroker, because it was the only way that someone would be able to purchase and sell stock, was to go and see your broker. And oftentimes, the broker came to your house, just like the insurance man did. To buy and to sell you a life insurance policy and collect the money. And so that is probably a good place for us to bring it to a close, because there's a large chapter where he grew the investment business, and he worked in the business for over 50 years.
Right.
And that was his passion, one of his passions. He had many passions, actually.
And of course, he was your mentor, and you now have taken over the business. And tell me the name and the address. Yes.
Well, currently he never did retire. We work for the Royal Bank of Canada, which is 5 Bristol Drive out on Belmont Street, and the industrial park. And I'm there with my daughter and his granddaughter. So we went for many, many years with 3 generations of service to this community as far as investments and wealth management go. But the name of his company was Hemp Illinois and Company when he started, but it had many, many mergers and iterations. And then when I came in 1986, it was Shearson Lehman Hutton.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had bought E.F. Hutton. And it was Shearson Lehman Brothers.
Wonderful life. He made choices about the quality of life, and yet he was very successful financially. So, and he was a philanthropist. He gave so much money to Easton, and he set up the Tricentennial Fund we're now
a forward thinker.
Yeah,
yes.
He was a forward thinker, but he had a wonderful personality. He was very caring and loving, and he was also very frugal.
Yes, he gave his most valuable asset, all of our valuable asset, which is time.
Yes,
that
exactly.
is our most valuable asset, not money.
No,
money
right.
can be found, it can be earned, it can be lost and re-earned.
Right.
But time can never be spent twice.
Exactly. Okay, and we learned a lot from him. Thank you so much, Kevin. And that's it for today. Hope you've enjoyed this program as much as we have enjoyed presenting it to you. All the best. Until next time, be well.
Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.